All right, so today we're diving deep into how Christian faith is shaping the 2024 election.
Oh, okay.
And, you might be thinking, okay, yeah, endorsements happen every election cycle. But
Right.
what we're seeing here is it's something a little bit different.
Yeah.
It's not just about saying, hey, vote for this person.
Right.
It's about presenting that vote as like a spiritual obligation.
It's really fascinating how certain Christian leaders and organizations are taking support for Donald Trump and elevating it beyond just a political choice. It's
Right.
almost like they're saying, your soul depends on this.
Yeah.
And that carries a lot of weight, especially in communities where faith is such a cornerstone of life.
Exactly. And we're not talking about, obscure figures here.
No.
These are big names in the evangelical world. Jerry Falwell Jr., Robert Jeffress, Franklin Graham, names you've probably heard before, even if you're not deeply involved in those circles.
Right.
What makes these figures so influential within this context?
Well, these individuals and the organizations they represent have built massive platforms over decades.
Yeah.
They have devoted followings who trust their interpretations of Scripture and their guidance on moral issues.
Right.
So when they frame support for Trump as a spiritual imperative, it's not just a political endorsement, it's a call to action rooted in deeply held beliefs.
Okay, so let's unpack how this actually plays out on the ground.
Sure.
The material you gave me mentions groups like the Family Research Council and the American Family Association. How are they turning endorsements into votes?
These groups are incredibly strategic.
Okay.
They don't just make a statement and hope for the best.
Yeah.
They leverage their vast networks, sending out targeted newsletters
Okay.
that weave political endorsements into discussions of biblical principles.
Oh, wow.
They run sophisticated social media campaigns that present complex issues in simple faith-based terms. And they host massive conferences where attendees are encouraged to view political participation as an extension of their religious duty.
So it's not just about, changing minds. It's about mobilizing a base that's already primed to see politics through a specific theological lens.
Precisely. And they're tapping into existing anxieties about the erosion of traditional values.
Right.
And they present Trump as a bulwark against those forces.
Yeah.
So when your pastor or a respected leader tells you that supporting this candidate is about defending your faith against secularism and liberalism,
Right.
it resonates on a really personal level.
Yeah.
It's not just about politics anymore. It's about safeguarding your way of life.
Now, this is where things get really interesting, at least for me.
Okay.
We're going beyond simple endorsements.
Yeah.
We're seeing actual theological justifications for supporting Trump's candidacy.
Right.
The sources cite biblical principles, highlighting themes of strong leadership, religious freedom, and America's supposed divine destiny.
Yeah, what's so compelling here is the way these leaders are weaving together political arguments with deep-seated religious beliefs.
Right.
It's no longer enough to agree on policy. They're pushing for alignment with what they present as God's will.
That's a powerful framework.
It is.
It removes any room for compromise or debate.
Exactly.
You're either with God or you're against him.
Right.
Speaking of potent frameworks, one of the sources specifically mentioned the prosperity gospel. I'm really curious about how that factors into all of this.
Okay.
Can you unpack that concept for us?
Of course, the prosperity gospel, in a nutshell, is the belief that God rewards faith with material blessings,
Okay.
health, wealth, success. And it's a concept that's gaining traction within certain segments of American Christianity.
Right.
And what we're seeing now is some evangelical leaders making a direct connection between this theology and support for Trump.
Okay.
They're suggesting that his policies, even his personal wealth, are evidence of God's favor.
Wow.
And by extension, supporting him brings you into alignment with that favor.
So it's not just about voting for a politician. It's about securing God's blessing for yourself and the nation.
It's a very potent message, absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Especially potent, I think, in times of economic uncertainty and social change. People crave stability and security.
yeah.
And this narrative offers a spiritual roadmap to achieve those things through political action.
So how does all of this translate to what's actually happening within churches?
Okay.
We're talking about increased political engagement, right?
Right.
But what does that look like in practice?
It's a pretty significant shift.
Okay.
These endorsements are leading to more voter registration drives being held in churches. There's a surge in congregants getting actively involved in campaigns, going beyond simply voting to phone banking, canvassing, and donating.
Wow.
And there's a growing push to advocate for specific policies, framing them as not just political issues, but moral imperatives.
Right.
Churches are becoming hubs of political activity, almost an extension of the campaigns themselves.
And that must be impacting the atmosphere within these churches, right?
Yeah.
Are political conversations becoming more common during services?
It's definitely changing the landscape. Some pastors are embracing this trend, actively encouraging political engagement from the pulpit, and seeing it as an integral part of their ministry.
Right.
Others are trying to find a more delicate balance, wanting to address these issues without alienating members who might hold different views.
Right.
It's creating tension and in some cases even conflict within congregations.
Yeah, it's crucial to acknowledge that this isn't a monolithic situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not all Christian leaders are lining up behind Trump. In fact, the sources you provided highlighted some pretty significant dissent and debate within the community.
Yeah, there's a diversity of thought within any religious group.
Right.
And the Christian community is no exception.
Exactly.
There are many leaders who openly criticize Trump's policies, his rhetoric, and his personal behavior, arguing that his actions are inconsistent with Christian values.
And they're concerned about the potential harm caused by aligning Christian faith so closely with a particular political figure or party.
Right. They worry about alienating younger generations and those who hold more progressive views on issues like social justice and LGBTQ+ rights.
That makes sense, especially given some of the demographic trends we're seeing.
Yeah.
There's a clear generational divide emerging, with younger Christians seemingly less likely to embrace these endorsements without question.
Yeah, it seems like they're less inclined to accept these endorsements at face value.
What's driving that shift?
It's a fascinating dynamic.
Yeah.
Younger Christians seem to be asking tougher questions.
Okay.
They're demanding more nuance and expressing concerns about the potential negative consequences of merging faith and politics so closely.
No.
They're more likely to engage with social media and online platforms, which exposes them to a wider range of viewpoints and challenges the traditional top-down authority structures that have long defined many Christian denominations.
So we're seeing a clash between different generations, different interpretations of faith, and different ways of engaging with the world.
It's a really interesting time to be observing this.
What are the potential implications of this generational divide?
Well, it's forcing churches to grapple with how to address these differing viewpoints within their congregations.
Yeah.
How do you maintain unity when there's such a fundamental disagreement about the role of faith in politics?
Right.
It's a question many churches are struggling with right now.
Absolutely. And it's a question we'll keep exploring in part 2 of this deep dive.
Looking forward to it.
So stay tuned.
This generational divide is really fascinating. It raises some big questions about, the future of faith-based political engagement.
Yeah, is this the way it's going to be from now on, or are we seeing a change?
Will younger generations continue to follow the lead of older generations, or are we on the verge of a significant shift in how faith influences politics?
It definitely feels like a pivotal moment. Like younger Christians seem less likely to blindly accept endorsements from authority figures.
It's not just blind acceptance anymore. It's critical thinking. Yeah.
A willingness to engage in difficult conversations.
Yeah.
And that's forcing a reckoning within many churches as they try to bridge this generational gap and figure out how to speak to a younger generation.
Right.
That's increasingly skeptical of traditional power structures.
Okay, so we've talked about the who and the how of these endorsements. But let's shift gears and talk about what specific policies or issues are being amplified by these faith leaders as they make the case for Donald Trump.
2 issues consistently rise to the top.
Okay.
Abortion and religious freedom. These are topics that resonate deeply with many conservative Christians.
Right.
And they're being leveraged to galvanize support for Trump and his political allies.
Okay, can you give me some examples of how that's happening?
Sure. Several of the sources you provided highlight how these leaders point to Trump's appointment of conservative Supreme Court justices as evidence of his commitment to overturning Roe v. Wade.
They argue that his policies protect religious institutions from government interference, allowing them to operate according to their beliefs without fear of legal repercussions.
So it's not just about Trump's personality or style.
Right.
It's about concrete policy outcomes that align with a specific set of values.
Exactly.
But how much of this support is about Trump himself versus the broader cultural anxieties we've been discussing?
Yeah.
Is it all about the man?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
And the answer is likely both.
Okay.
For some voters, Trump is seen as a flawed but necessary instrument to achieve their political goals.
Right.
He's the one willing to fight for their values, even if they don't necessarily agree with everything he says or does.
So for them, it's a means to an end kind of situation.
Yeah, you could say that.
But for others, it seems like there's a genuine admiration, even reverence for Trump himself.
Yeah.
They see him as more than just a politician. They see him as a savior figure.
That's right. There's a segment of the population that views Trump as a divinely appointed leader.
Wow.
Almost a messianic figure.
Yeah.
They believe he's been chosen by God to restore America to its former glory,
Right.
to fight against the forces of evil that they perceive are threatening their way of life.
And that belief is reinforced by the endorsements coming from their trusted faith leaders.
Right. When those leaders present Trump in such glowing terms, it validates their worldview and strengthens their conviction that he's the right man for the job.
And that ties back into the prosperity gospel idea, right?
Exactly.
The belief that supporting Trump will bring about God's favor and blessings for themselves and the nation.
It feeds into this narrative that America is a chosen nation blessed by God, and that Trump is the leader who will usher in a new era of prosperity and righteousness.
It's a powerful message, especially in times of economic uncertainty and cultural upheaval.
Absolutely. People are looking for hope for security.
Yeah.
And this narrative offers them a way to achieve those things through their political choices.
It's remarkable how these endorsements weave together faith, politics, and even economics into a single compelling narrative.
It's a potent mix that's clearly having a significant impact on the 2024 election.
But it also raises some important questions, right?
Absolutely. Questions about the appropriate role of faith in public life. Where do we draw the line between religious expression and political influence?
Right.
How do we ensure that these endorsements are not being used to manipulate or exploit people's beliefs?
Yeah. These are questions that transcend any particular election or candidate.
Right. These are questions that go to the heart of how we understand the relationship between faith and politics in a pluralistic society.
These are tough questions.
They are.
And I don't think there are any easy answers.
Yeah.
But they're questions we need to keep asking, especially as we head deeper into this election season.
Absolutely.
How can voters discern whether an endorsement is coming from a place of genuine conviction or from a desire to maintain power or influence? What happens when religious leaders use their platforms to promote a particular political agenda?
These are conversations that we need to have as a society.
You know, you're making me think about something.
Okay.
We've been talking about this one very dominant narrative,
Right.
but it's crucial to acknowledge that this isn't the whole story.
Absolutely.
This narrative we've been unpacking doesn't represent the entirety of the Christian community.
Right.
There's a lot of diversity within this faith tradition, and it's important to avoid painting with too broad a brush.
It is. There are Christian leaders who enthusiastically endorse Trump.
Right.
But there are others who are deeply troubled by his candidacy and who see his actions and rhetoric as antithetical to Christian values.
We need to make sure those voices are being heard as well.
Absolutely. It's not just about presenting a single perspective.
Right.
It's about understanding the full spectrum of beliefs and opinions within the Christian community and how those beliefs are shaping their engagement with the political process.
All right, it's not just about conservative Christians feeling threatened.
Right. There are Christian leaders and voters who prioritize social justice issues, who advocate for policies that support the poor and marginalized,
Yeah.
who champion the rights of immigrants and refugees. Their faith informs their political choices just as deeply
Right.
as it does for those who support Trump.
So as we wrap up part 2 of this deep dive,
Okay.
what are some key takeaways for our listener as they try to make sense of this complex landscape?
I think it's clear that faith is playing a significant role in the 2024 election, particularly within the Christian community.
Yeah.
We've seen how endorsements from prominent leaders are shaping perceptions of candidates, mobilizing voters, and influencing policy debates.
Right.
But it's essential to remember that this is a multifaceted, dynamic landscape
Right.
with differing viewpoints, generational divides, and ethical considerations that need to be carefully examined.
You've given our listener a lot to think about. As we head into part 3, we'll explore the potential long-term impact of these trends.
Okay.
Will this merging of faith and politics continue to grow?
Right.
And if so, what are the potential consequences? Will it lead to further fragmentation within the Christian community?
Right.
Or could it spark a renewed sense of purpose and engagement?
These are all great questions.
We'll tackle these questions and more in our final segment. So we've talked about, how these endorsements are happening, why they're happening,
Right.
the impact they're having. But where do we go from here?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, what does the future hold for this relationship between faith and politics in America?
I think these are questions that are going to continue to unfold long after the votes are counted in 2024.
Yeah.
What we're witnessing right now is a potential realignment, a reshaping of the landscape.
Okay.
It's not just about who wins an election.
Yeah.
It's about how faith communities define themselves,
Right.
how they engage with the world, and how they navigate the tensions between their beliefs and the changing cultural tides.
And it feels like the stakes are really high.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that some conservative Christians are feeling increasingly anxious, even fearful about the direction of American society. They see their values being marginalized, their way of life under attack.
Right.
And that sense of threat seems to be fueling this, intense politicization of faith.
One of the sources you provided used a really striking phrase, a siege mentality.
Wow.
And that captures the feeling perfectly. It's the sense that they're under attack, surrounded by hostile forces that want to undermine their faith, their families, their very identity.
So in that context, political engagement, it becomes less about policy debates and more about existential survival.
Exactly. Supporting the right candidate isn't just about advancing a political agenda. It's about defending their way of life.
And that us versus them mentality can be so powerful.
Oh, absolutely. It creates this sense of urgency, a need to rally behind a leader who promises to protect them from those perceived threats.
But that can also be really dangerous.
It can be, yeah.
Like when faith becomes so intertwined with politics, it can create barriers between people even within the same community.
It can lead to the demonization of those who hold different views, a hardening of hearts,
Yeah.
a reluctance to engage in meaningful dialogue.
And ultimately, it can erode that sense of unity and shared purpose that, should bind people of faith together.
Yeah, I think that's one of the potential downsides of this trend.
We've already seen how these endorsements are causing tension and debate within churches.
Yeah.
Even fracturing relationships between family members and friends.
Yeah, it's happening.
What happens if those divisions continue to widen?
Well, some experts believe that it could lead to further fragmentation within the Christian community, with, different denominations or congregations aligning themselves more closely with specific political ideologies.
Interesting.
Instead of, a broad, diverse tapestry of beliefs and practices. You might see churches becoming more homogenous, more insular, more focused on reinforcing their own internal beliefs
Right.
than on engaging with the wider world.
So it's not just about, winning elections.
Right.
It's about shaping the future of these faith communities themselves.
Exactly. And the choices that Christian leaders and individuals make in the coming years will have a ripple effect that extends far beyond the walls of their churches.
So what would a more constructive, a more hopeful path look like?
I think it starts with, recognizing the complexities of these issues, resisting the temptation to reduce complex theological and political questions to simplistic sound bites and slogans.
Right.
It involves, engaging in respectful dialogue with those who hold different views, seeking to understand their perspectives even when we disagree.
Right.
And it involves prioritizing love, compassion, and justice above political expediency or partisan loyalty.
Those are the values that lie at the heart of the Christian faith. And they should guide our engagement with the political process, regardless of our party affiliation or which candidate we support.
Absolutely well said.
Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive into faith and the 2024 election. And, it's clear that this is an issue with no easy answers.
No.
And it's something that we all need to grapple with.
We do.
But hopefully this conversation has given you some new insights, some new perspective to consider as you navigate this complex and ever-evolving landscape.
I hope so.
Ultimately, it's up to each of us to decide how we want to engage with these issues. But let's try to do it thoughtfully, respectfully, and with an open mind.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us.